Sometimes you have to use force in this world because there are a lot of horrible, evil, bad guys, for lack of a better term, because they're usually not gals. Although sometimes. And so you use the force in order to get them to stop so that you can put an end to the killing, put an end to the death.
Trump has his boogeymen. They're Chinese, they're Muslim, they're Mexican, okay? And as you pointed out in your recent article in Politico, Vladimir Putin's boogeyman is the United States. So let's go forward a little bit, assuming that Donald Trump basically adheres to what Vladimir Putin wants of him on foreign policy for this country. How does that play out in our relationship to Russia?
It depends how far Trump wants to go to be buddies with Vladimir Putin, because we have real interest. The United States has enduring interest and values at stake here. And what I'm talking about now is Russia's desire to have a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe and in Central Asia. And if we let Russia have its way on that, that means that the troops can stay in Ukraine, Russian troops can stay in Ukraine, Russian troops can stay in Moldova, Russian troops can stay in Georgia, that Russia can meddle politically, economically, and militarily in countries on its periphery without any opposition from us. And that would be a problem because our number one trading partner collectively is Europe. Our only operational military alliance is NATO. Our first partners, whether they're NATO members or not, are in Europe. And our values are to promote or strengthen democracy, to support those people and nations that would like democracy, and a free market economy. So we would be walking back from that to a place where we haven't been since Yalta, frankly speaking, which was the end of the Cold War, where we made a deal with Stalin. We said, okay, fine, you can have Eastern Europe because we don't want to have another war with Russia. And we said goodbye to those people behind the Iron Curtain for 50 years.
What about this idea that NATO is obsolete? And it seems like Putin would like to see Trump weaken NATO. What interest does the United States have in a more stable Europe?
Look, every time that Europe has fallen apart, that has become fragmented, we've had to come and rescue Europe, again, because they are our trading partner, because they are our natural allies. And NATO is the answer to that. For once and for all, together with our Canadian neighbors, we're going to be a transatlantic, united alliance. Collectively, we're going to defend one another. So an attack against one is an attack against all. That created stability. Then you could have economic development and proceed from there. If you start taking that apart, all of those countries will start rearming. They'll start looking at one another more suspiciously because some of it was aimed at getting them to be united, not just to counter the Soviet Union, but also to be united amongst themselves because there's a lot of friction there still. So, if that comes apart, then you have more friction in Europe. You have more, I don't want to sound alarmist, but the reality is if you allow more misunderstanding to build up over time, it could lead to war. I mean, we didn't think it would be possible to have war in Ukraine or war in the former Yugoslavia and the Balkans in the 90s. And unfortunately, it happens. And it doesn't happen overnight. It can happen slowly.
Okay, I think most of us understand World War II was awful.
Yes.
And World War I was awful.
Yes.
And in both cases, there was an attempt afterwards to create alliances that would prevent it from happening again. Right. It actually has been a more peaceful 70 years than we've ever had in the history of Earth. Just if you could give us an overview of the theory.
Right. So after the First World War, we created the League of Nations. It was more of a talk shop. There was no alliances where you automatically had to go defend another country. What happened at the end of the Second World War was really a determination. Okay, obviously we can't, turn our back on Europe because we tried. In between the World War I and World War II, in America, it was actually America first. They used that campaign. And it was a way of saying, you Europeans, you're on your own. Don't bother us with your problems because we lost too many men in Europe fighting for you. So we're just going to trade with you. And you guys figure it out. The problem was World War II came and we couldn't avoid it because we had these enduring interests. And so we got sucked into it. At the end of World War II, again, this was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and then he died and Truman took over as president and built these institutions. So we signed a treaty actually in San Francisco creating the UN. And then within the UN was the Security Council because the decision was, okay, we need to have a way so that the most powerful countries would be able to exercise a veto over, but more importantly, make sure that something happens in the case of a crisis. And they would get together and they would vote on what the action would be. In addition, the West said, okay, that's all fine and good. Maybe we'll try to get along with the Soviet Union, but they were starting to see that Stalin couldn't be trusted. He had promised that there would be free and fair elections in Poland, in Hungary, the Czech Republic, these countries that wanted to be democratic, actually. And that wasn't the case. He took them over. He created these socialist groups, and then they were renamed communist groups. They took over, and ultimately they all became pretty much dictatorships. And that lasted, of course, as long as the Cold War lasted. We were watching all of this in Western Europe thinking, okay, well, we don't want, Western Europe to become communist and be run by dictators. And NATO was part of that just to make them more secure, so that those countries knew that the United States would come to their defense if they were attacked, and more importantly, to signal to the Soviet Union that they should not try any kind of military action against those countries, Germany and others that were right on the border of the Soviet Union.